Is there a prophetic preacher in the house? That's what I want to talk about for a few minutes. Is there a prophetic preacher in the house? I'm not here to argue the case. I'm just going to proclaim, because if I attempted to argue, I would be like the story I heard of a little girl named Mary who had a debate with a teacher as to whether Jonah, the whale really swallowed Jonah. And so they went back and forth, and the teacher appeared to have been winning. But little Mary didn't give up. She said, "Teacher, no disrespect," she said, "but my mama told me that I should believe the Bible. And if I would believe the Bible, I would go to heaven. And I really believe that the fish swallowed Jonah." And so the teacher proceeded to debate. So finally, the teacher decided to just overwhelm this kid with logic and said, "Just hold up." She said, "Listen, let's suppose for a minute that Jonah went to hell. And just like you are silent and listening for the resolve, little Mary felt overwhelmed, but looked at her teacher and said, "Then you ask him." I'm not here to argue. I just want to bear witness after 40 years. William Temple stated that the modern world reminded him of a department store where someone crept in overnight and switched all the labels and placed expensive tags on cheap items and cheap tags on expensive items. Brothers and sisters, can we agree that we live in a culture today where our values are skewed and distorted? Prophetic voices were almost muted and silent about our failure of intelligence in Iraq and our failure of imagination during the Katrina crisis. And I'm still puzzled by those who will march against abortions, but they will go brain dead with silence about racism and militarism, as was played out in the recent horrendous carnage of untold numbers of lives in a war based on flawed intelligence that we all witness. I'm still puzzled. I feel less safe than before. And it doesn't take rocket science to know that the military intrusion into a sovereign nation was really blood for oil. Shame on the Bush regime, who will be judged harshly by history. See, death is death, whether it is by a bullet or needle. It took Katrina to reveal that the average annual income for many persons in the hardest hit areas of New Orleans was $9,000 a year, compared to $24,000 nationwide for African Americans and $33,000 for whites. We all watched in horror as tax-paying citizens hung on rooftops 3 to 5 days, labeled by the media as refugees. We live in a nation where we have the capability of logistically moving troops and supplies anywhere on the globe within 24 hours. But we couldn't spot those folk on the rooftop. We live in a nation where Michael Vick's dogs are more important than our unfed poor. Tiger Woods' philandering is more important than placing a roof over the head of our most vulnerable citizens. We also have the capability of eliminating poverty in America. The problem is we have the resources, but not the will. Oh, Jesus. Let me illustrate this. During the early 80s, one Trident nuclear attack submarine cost $1.7 billion. 2 decades later, the Trident was replaced by the Seawolf. Based on a recent definitive report, the Seawolf is the most technically advanced, fast attack nuclear submarine of its kind. It can cover more ocean and strike as hard as its predecessor with little or no chance of ever being detected because of its quietness, speed, and capability. But how about a price tag of $2.8 billion per unit? But let's not talk about $1 billion. Let's talk about $2 trillion. Our national budget should be a little over $2. You can reach for your calculator. It is estimated that for less than $2 trillion, you can build a $150,000 house, place it on $10,000 worth of land, furnish it with $15,000 worth of furniture, put a $13,000 car in the garage, give it, all of this to nearly every family in Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Iowa. And having done this, you would still have enough left to build a $10 million library in each 200 cities and towns throughout the 5-state area. After having done that, you would still have enough money to build 500 schools. That's $16 million each for the communities in the region. And after having done that, you will still have enough left out of the original amount to put aside at 8% annual interest, a sum of money that will pay a salary of $40,000 per year for 10,000 nurses, a similar salary for 10,000 teachers, and an annual cash allowance of $7,000 for each and every family throughout the 5-state region, not just for 1 year, but indefinitely. But America doesn't want to tell you about the welfare program for defense contractors. You see, the conservative media avoid talking about this issue. Rush Limbaugh, Hannity, and company would rather spend their day demonizing and trashing President Barack Obama. Once the president began to address corruption on Wall Street, the auto industry, and healthcare, he learned early that America is nowhere near being what he thought was post-racial. Being post-racial is an ideal, but it is not real. I hope this is the right house. I know you've been watching those Tea Party activists. They would rather talk about non-working people on welfare to divert attention away from the real welfare cats who use Saks, with Wall Street, and EIG to pay themselves outrageous hefty bonuses, creating a national financial crisis. They do not want greed exposed. They don't want the public to know that we've been paying blindly for years for wars never to be fought, planes and missiles that malfunction, and they get expensively redesigned, then immediately declared outdated, only to start the whole costly cycle all over again. The late Dr. Caesar Clark preached a sermon years ago, "Is there a preacher in the house?" I concluded that if I raised this question today, most gatherings, one could easily come up with a grandstanding house full of clergy who would willingly answer that question. I can see you waving, "Yes, I'm one." It seems to me that one word was missing from Dr. Clark's rhetorical sermon, and it is the word prophetic. To even mention the word prophetic is to set limits, to place parameters, on the kind of preaching expected of us. Dr. Gardner Taylor reminded us that preaching in and of itself is a presumptuous undertaking. But prophetic preaching is not only presumption, it is a brazen, bold, and audacious undertaking fraught with all kinds of risk-taking. You see, it's risky business because the gospel is good news, bad news, and indifferent news. It depends on the street where you are. And by the way, preaching is not just saying something, but rather having something to say. From a common sense perspective, what denomination, what seminary or institution qualifies or authorizes redeemed sinners to stand before other sinners for the express purpose of denouncing their sinfulness? What seminary will qualify you to enter the King's Court or the White House and speak truth to power? What divinity school really prepares beggars to show other beggars where to find bread? Who empowers us with the madness and audacity, the guts and the gall, to leave one's flock and burst into a religious gathering at First So-and-so Church and start pronouncing woes before the usher can get to you? I hate your feasts. I hate your solemn assemblies. Woe be unto those who are at ease in Zion.